The stars in boxing makes an absurd amount of money. Ever wondered why a UFC champion makes a fraction of what a top boxer earns? Francis Ngannou, one of the hardest hitters in MMA history, made around $600,000 for his last UFC fight. But when he stepped into the boxing ring against Tyson Fury, he walked away with over $10 million. That's more than 16 times his UFC payday. So, what's the deal? Why do UFC fighters, who put their bodies on the line just as much as boxers, get paid so much less? Well, it all comes down to one thing: how the UFC and boxing handle money. Let's break it down. First, let's talk about how the UFC and boxing operate financially. The biggest difference? The UFC is a monopoly while boxing is decentralized. UFC fighters have less negotiating power. The UFC controls everything: the promotion, the matchmaking, the contracts. Everything runs through one company. Fighters have very little power to negotiate their pay. Because of this, UFC fighters only get around 20% of the revenue the company makes. Meanwhile, in boxing, fighters take home almost 50% of the money generated from fights. The UFC keeps a much larger slice of the pie, which means fighters get paid less. Boxing has competing promoters. In boxing, multiple promotions exist: Top Rank, Matchroom, PBC, Golden Boy. This means fighters can go where they get paid the most. Big-name boxers can negotiate with different promoters and networks like DAZN or Showtime, forcing them to pay top dollar. Think about it like this: if you worked in a company where you were the only employee, your boss could pay you whatever they wanted. But if there were multiple companies competing to hire you, you'd get paid a lot more. That's exactly why boxers make more than UFC fighters. Now, let's compare how paychecks actually work in UFC versus boxing. UFC pay structure. Most UFC fighters are paid a flat show money amount plus a win bonus. A typical contract might be $12,000 to show, $12,000 to win. That means if you lose, you only take home $12K. Even UFC champions often make only a few $100,000 per fight, unless they're massive stars like Conor McGregor. Even top-tier fighters like Israel Adesanya or Kamaru Usman have earned between $500K and $1 per fight, with some PPV bonuses added. Boxing pay structure. Boxers negotiate a guaranteed flat purse, no win bonus. A mid-level boxer can make 6 or 7 figures per fight, and top boxers earn way more. For example, Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury both made $25 million in their second fight, while a UFC heavyweight champ might make $1-2 million per fight at best. At the very top, the difference is even crazier. Floyd Mayweather made $300 million fighting Conor McGregor, while McGregor's biggest UFC payday was only $3 million guaranteed, 100 times less. Another major factor? Sponsorship money. Boxers can wear their own sponsors in the ring, but UFC fighters can't. In 2015, the UFC signed an exclusive deal with Reebok, now Venom, banning fighters from wearing personal sponsors during fights. Before that, UFC fighters could make 6 or even 7 figures from sponsors alone. Meanwhile, boxers can plaster their trunks with sponsors and make millions per fight just from endorsements. Floyd Mayweather was making over $1 million per round just from sponsors on his shorts. UFC fighters? They get a set amount from the UFC's sponsor deal, usually only a few $1,000s unless they're champions. Another big reason UFC fighters get paid less is that they don't have a union. In most major sports like the NBA or NFL, players have unions that negotiate contracts and salaries for them. In boxing, fighters have managers and promoters competing to pay them more. UFC fighters, on the other hand, have to negotiate one-on-one with Dana White and the UFC. If they push too hard, they might get cut. There have been efforts to create a fighters' union, and there's even an ongoing antitrust lawsuit against the UFC for unfair pay practices. But as of now, the UFC still controls the money. So, will UFC fighters ever make as much as boxers? Probably not anytime soon. The UFC's business model gives them way more control over fighter pay than boxing promoters have. The only way things could change is if a major fighter-led movement forces the UFC to change its pay structure. Francis Ngannou's move to boxing is a perfect example. He left the UFC and instantly made 10 times more money. Do you think UFC fighters deserve more pay? Should they start a union? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fight content. See you in the next one.